A key demographic that helped elect Trump is now abandoning him in droves. We're going to talk about why and what this means for young Democrats and Republicans. So pour a drink, playlisters, because we're bringing you into our group chat about politics and the next generation of leaders in this country. This is Political Playlist Happy Hour.
Welcome to Political Playlist.
All right, are we ready, guys?
Happy Hour.
Happy hour.
You fucked that up so bad.
God.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Political Playlist Happy Hour. I'm Michael Kristoff.
I'm Anna Muskie-Goldwyn.
And we are down a man today because I have to say, playlisters, Anthony and I were at a bit of a party on Friday.
Okay.
And you can hear it in my voice a little bit. I'm a little raspy. Anthony is whereabouts unknown. He stopped sharing his location with you and I, and we don't know where he is. We hope somewhere in San Diego or en route to San Diego.
I mean,
we have no idea.
I hope you guys had fun. I feel great having
we
not
did.
partied all weekend.
Yeah. Well, no, just to be clear, this was partying on Friday, and we're still now a little tired on Monday.
That's because as we prepare for this episode that is about young voters, we have to start to acknowledge that we are slowly leaving that group behind, some of us sooner than others.
That felt directed at me. Moving on.
But you know who also was partying this weekend?
Who was that?
Was a bunch of politicians that TMZ is now asking for images of. Have you seen this? This
by
is,
the
by the
way,
way, not what our episode's about, but I'm obsessed with this. So we're going to talk about it for a second.
I love that TMZ is getting into the political game.
Did you see this?
No.
Okay,
no,
so
I don't know anything
TMZ
about it.
Basically,
what's going on?
They posted or like sent whatever. They sent out a signal that that they wanted people to submit photos of politicians if they saw them out in the wild, because as you may or may not know, dear listener or viewer, the Senate and House have gone into recess, even though there has not been an agreement on funding DHS partially or fully. Luckily, Trump has issued an executive order so that TSA agents are now being paid again, which is good. But that doesn't rectify the situation that's happening in Congress. And so the Senate basically passed something that was a compromise, and then Leader Thune adjourned everybody for recess, went to the House. Because it was a compromise, Johnson refused to bring it to the floor for a vote, and then he sent everybody home. And so TMZ basically has been like, hey, let's troll some politicians who should be in Washington working on getting the government funded, but instead they're off at home doing whatever. And so there was like a picture of Lindsey Graham at Disney World. There was a video of Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee, at the DC airport. There was photos of someone we used to cover, Robert Garcia, who's a Democrat from the Long Beach area in California. And there were photos of him in Vegas. And then he had like a response where he was like, I'm glad these photos are out. I was visiting my dad, who I like to see as much as possible. And since Leader Johnson adjourned us, I decided I would go hang out with my dad. So like, I just love that TMZ is now engaging people in politics, I guess.
Well, I've seen them trolling a lot of these political leaders in airports recently, given all the TSA stuff and the ICE presence. And we talked about it, I think last week or the week before, that Delta Airlines ceased their service where they allowed like a Delta agent to escort represented members of Congress through security and help them expedite their arrival and departure through airports. They said, we're stopping that service if you're not funding TSA, which I thought, by the way, brilliant PR move by Delta. And so TMZ has been trolling these leaders who have been getting these
the
special escorts from other airlines and whatnot in the airports. And, they've got their representative who's like helping them cut the line. And they're just there like head down, ducked. And it's just the hypocrisy is insane.
it kind of is a good segue into what we're going to talk about today, because really what it's an illustration of is the divide within the Republican Party, which is that Senate Republicans were basically like, okay, we're not getting anywhere on ICE. Let's try to get funding for the rest of DHS, which includes TSA and, very importantly, FEMA. And then the House, which all of them are up for re-election, tends to be more divided, tends to sort of lean into more of these partisan antics, essentially said, well, we're not going to do a compromise. We're not going to work with Democrats. And so you have two Republican leaders, one in the House and one in the Senate, on completely different pages about how to handle this DHS shutdown and subsequent funding, which I think is like an example of the larger kind of fractures, shifts, what have you, that you're starting to see in the Republican Party, which leads us to our topic today, which is
indeed how to talk about young Republicans. And so we've spoken a lot, and I think this has gotten a lot of coverage, this sort of mythic group of voters, the young Republican Gen Z men, which, much to Anna's dismay, we won't dwell on today. Totally. We want to sort of look at this through the prism of really four key issues: healthcare, the economy, foreign policy, and immigration. But why we wanted to talk about this today was we've seen in recent weeks a number of articles that have started to point to a real fracture in the young Republican support for this administration. And particularly a Time article had a lot of relevant statistics that we want to share with you and talk about. So a couple of sort of key indicators here of a real fracturing support as we head into these midterms. In 2024, the presidential election, Trump received 39% of the 18 to 29-year-old vote share. Okay, this is according to Pew Research.
Yeah.
And he won about 54% of young men. Now, when we look at a poll from The Economist this past February, okay, Gen Z support has dropped to the lowest it's been in the second term. He went to an approval rating. He went from, so right now, hold on, let me see if I can get this right here. Okay. His approval rating among 18 to 29 is at 25%. So
Wow.
67% disapproving. Okay. This is down from a 50% approval rating in 2025. So this is, general approval. That is a massive swing. And another big swing among Gen Z is on jobs approval. When he was elected a year ago, he was plus 10 in percentage points. Now he's negative 32
in
percentage points. Yeah. And this is a CBS News poll. So, these are all credible polls, right? These aren't just wacky outliers and whatnot. And I think, the interesting thing to see here is, I'll kind of lead off anecdotally. There was the recent CPAC convention. And the reporting out of there, again, very anecdotally, but the reporting was it had some real meager attendance. It had what a lot of young Gen Z Republicans call the MAGA B-listers, which is to say, not the big fancy headliners. This is your B squad.
I believe Matt Gaetz was one of the speakers.
Matt Gaetz. Yeah, exactly. Matt Gaetz, My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell. And one of the keynote speakers was Nick Shirley, obviously the young 23-year-old, Republican influencer / investigative.
Who began, by the way, like some might say, all of the chaos that ensued in Minneapolis was really thanks to this guy.
So, the approval ratings are way down among young Republicans, way down among young Republican men. This was a key group that carried Trump to victory in 2024. And I think a great place to start here is on the issue of healthcare. And, this is one of those issues that I was sort of so surprised to see a lot of young Republicans talking about how important this issue was. And again, let me give you a Wall Street Journal poll here to sort of start us off. So some 66% of young men that were surveyed were concerned about the cuts to healthcare funding that went towards the big, beautiful bill. Trump's approval rating on healthcare is negative 32 points from where it was a year ago. What do you make of that, Anna? What do you think is the change there? Are these young voters starting to feel that with their premiums or lack thereof in terms of coverage?
I think
What do
there's
you
always been this assumption that on the left and the right, young voters were kind of like cultural issue voters. So whether that be on the left, voting around reproductive rights, whether it be on the right, voting around gender identity or whatever you want, whatever sort of cultural social issue you want to pick. And I think that what this shows is that actually young people just care about the same things that everybody else does.
Yeah.
And with healthcare specifically, I think you have a lot of young people may have voted in their early 20s when they were still on their parents' healthcare. Now they're finding that they're having to get their own healthcare, whether through work or independently or what have you, and that healthcare is really expensive in our country. And
Yeah.
even if want the most basic whatever, that it's still going to cost you what feels like an arm and a leg. And so I think that there's maybe that like there's sort of an aging thing of realizing, oh yeah, this is something that shouldn't cost so much. But what I also think is that Trump himself has talked a lot about the affordability of healthcare, specifically as it relates to prescription drugs. And, I think he has actually done, he's made an effort to kind of try to make way in the cost of prescription drugs on a lot of levels, which I will give him and his administration credit for. But I think that what maybe voters sometimes would conflate is that Trump would talk about healthcare is too expensive, drugs are too expensive. And they're like, yeah, we agree, right? Like everybody agrees. But then when you see that same person passing legislation that's going to cut Medicaid programs, which many of these people's family members and themselves might rely on, and then cut ACA subsidies that people have been relying on for over a decade that they might have not even known they were relying on. You see the practice of what the administration is doing compared to the promise of what they said they were going to do to solve the problem. And I think that's where you start to see some of that like flip, if you will, to seeing that, oh, they're not really handling healthcare in the way that I expected they would.
Well, and to remind folks, the big, beautiful bill, which the Republicans realized how unpopular that was politically, that they began rebranding it, right? And so they began running from that term. And to remind folks, there were nearly $800 billion cut from Medicaid alone. And I think there was a very interesting, I saw it on Instagram, but from like CBS News or Wall Street Journal, where Trump had said recently how he's lifted 3 million people out of poverty. And a Republican senator or a Republican congressman who's older, I forget his name, but we don't cover him on this, had
He's
said,
old.
no, Mr. President, you're wrong. You just kicked 3 million people off Medicaid and Medicare, and you didn't give them a replacement. Like, this is a problem.
A Republican said that?
Yes.
Was it Don Bacon, the one who's always speaking out against him?
I don't think it was Don Bacon, but it was somebody like a Don Bacon.
That's very interesting.
I think as we look at this issue coming to the midterms, obviously you look at these approval ratings or disapproval ratings, and this spells doom and gloom for Republicans, right? This bodes very well for Democrats taking back the House, possibly the Senate. And, I want to read you what Richie Torres, congressman from New York, said. He said, no district has greater stake in Medicaid than mine. About 70% of my constituents depend on it. Gutting healthcare to bankroll war and mass deportation is morally indefensible. Now, I don't want to segue to our other topics quite yet, but this is in response to an Axios reporting that Republicans are now considering a reduction in federal health spending to help pay for a bill that would allow for $200 billion to fund this
Mhm.
Iran war and possibly also more funding for immigration enforcement. So I'm curious, as we're heading into the midterms here, this is obviously a very potent message for Democrats.
Mhm.
And I think the challenge for Republicans is, okay, with all this anecdotal stuff you're seeing at the recent CPAC, and you're seeing these young Republicans disenfranchised with where they thought this administration and the MAGA movement was going. Do you think these are gettable voters for Democrats? What should Republicans do about this? Like, it seems like healthcare is a way more potent issue than our leaders thought,
Well, I think what is
or at
working in the
least
Democrat
some thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's working in the Democrats' favor is they've always known healthcare was one of the biggest issues. It goes all the way
Mhm.
back to the Affordable Care Act. You know, like I do think that Democrats, to their credit, have always remained steadfast on healthcare, whether it be in the 2020 presidential primaries, where, you had kind of this fight between the more Bernie side of things and the more Biden side of things in terms of Medicare for all, or something that was more still privatized. Like, I do think that Democrats have actually always been focusing on healthcare. And I think that it's one of those things where if you just stay on the wave long enough, you're going to be on it at the point where it crests to your advantage. And I think that it's cresting to their advantage now. And
Yeah.
I think that these voters, these young voters who voted for Trump, first of all, many of them might have been first time voters. Some of them might have been people who were disenfranchised, didn't really care about politics until they saw Trump on Theo Vaughn's podcast or
Yeah.
whatever it might have
Yeah.
been, and they connected to him. And so I totally think that they're gettable voters for Democrats, because I think you have to look to some of these people on the Democratic side of the aisle who are trying to message around stuff like healthcare, but in a way that feels fresh, in a way that feels like they're talking to their peers. I mean, like, we focus on all of these young people in office because they have a way of communicating that I think is different than some of the people who have either been in politics for a long time or are older than them. And so I do think that Democrats' steadfast, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, commitment
Mhm.
to healthcare and wanting to advance healthcare policy and make healthcare more affordable. I think that this is the moment, and I think it can continue into the presidential election in a few years. This is the moment where that steadfastness is going to benefit them if they can, get people to understand that this is something they really want to fix, which takes a little bit of work on their end.
Yeah. Well, somebody who's really been a good, spokesman for at least the Democratic side of things, Jake Auchincloss,
Hmm.
who, congressman from Massachusetts, has spoken a lot about healthcare and certainly the economy. And I'm curious, with the economy here, what strikes you about this? So
Yeah.
obviously,
So,
Trump was way more popular in his handling or his perceived handling of the economy than Kamala. What's going
mhm.
on with young Republicans here?
Yeah, so in this article that we've been referencing about these young voters, one of the issues that jumps out that isn't maybe as surprising as healthcare is the economy. And 58% of men in this third way poll, which is a nonpartisan organization, said that Trump had negatively impacted their finances. 58% of young men.
Wow.
And then only 23% say that it's had a positive impact. 29% of voters from ages 18 to 29 disapproving of Trump's policies on tariffs, and 25% disapproving of his performance on the economy. So you are starting to see these disapproval ratings that, could have an impact on how people feel about Trump and the economy. The one other stat that I thought was really interesting is that 58% of respondents to this poll who are under 30 years old felt that the economy was getting worse. 53% saying they perceived the prices of goods and services going up, and 71% of the under 30 respondents in this poll which was in mid-January, disapproved of Trump's handling of inflation, and 76% felt that the Trump administration was not doing enough to lower prices. So those
Wow.
are like dramatic numbers.
Dramatic. That is dramatic.
And
you
I
are
think
not
that,
being dramatic by calling that dramatic. That's really bad.
And so I think that, like, again, it goes back to what I'm saying before, which is that young people care about the same shit that everybody else does, which is that they want to have a good paying job. They want to be able to afford the stuff in their life, and they want to be healthy. And I think that, you know, Trump is a guy who makes a lot of promises. And I think that he has actually done a almost worse job in this term than in his first term in acting in some sort of accordance with what he said in his campaigning. Like, I think that he's gone so far away, whether it be in the Middle East, whether it be in the way that he handled tariffs. You know, he has all these policies that I think have gone so far away from what his intentions and were when he campaigned and what he was preaching to some of these young people specifically. And I just think it goes to show that, like, young people aren't stupid, you know, like,
Right.
we're not just going to sit there and say, like, oh yeah, like, you know, we're going to blindly defend things. I think that we've had conversations with people in the past where it's like, specifically Gen Z is increasingly independent. You know, they're not
Right.
adhering to one party or the other. So when it comes to these specific issues, they're going to pick and choose who they feel is actually doing a good job. And
Well,
I just
let me give you a quote on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there was a New York Times article that we've talked about that was covering the last week's CPAC convention, and there's a young man here, Aiden Hofseyes. I hope I'm saying that name right. He's 19 years old. He traveled from Maine to get to this CPAC conference, which was in Texas. It was his first one. He's a Republican, and he's quoted as saying that it's not fair for somebody to graduate college and have $100,000 worth of debt. We're spending billions of dollars on other countries. Why can't we help our own people? And I think that to your point, you know, no matter what party you are affiliated with, left, right, center, like, don't care. If you have two eyes and a brain, you're watching the president and his family make literally billions of dollars, and you are buried in college loans. Maybe you've been laid off from a job. Maybe you can't afford your health care. You're seeing the prices at the pump go up. Now with the war in Iran, it's like crazy. And, you know, and you're seeing inflation not coming down the way you were promised on the campaign trail by him. And so I think that, like, it's so interesting. To your point, this younger generation is so much more willing to disassociate from a full slate, top to bottom party ideology and more of this, you know, Netflix option of issues. And like this gentleman here is saying, yeah, you know, $100,000 of student debt is a real problem. And that is something I care about. And why can't the federal government do something about that? And spoiler, they did, and Donald Trump undid it. But, you know, we'll save that for another pod. But I'm curious, like, again, as we look to the midterms here, you know, do you think that these become potent issues that people can win on? And really, like, these are going to be the things. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, like, the reason I thought this article was so great is I feel like the four issues that it named: healthcare, oh my God, my brain's not working.
Healthcare, foreign policy, the economy,
the four issues that it named: healthcare, the economy, immigration, and foreign policy. Immigration and foreign policy we'll still get to in a second. That I do think that these are going to be the four issues that people are voting on in the midterms. I think depending what happens with Iran, foreign policy might kind of like fall away. But I think that I do actually think that foreign policy is looped into the economy, especially on the Republican side, for exactly what this young gentleman said in that quote, which is that Trump kind of ran on this preaching of we're not going to take care of anybody else. We're going to take care of ourselves, America first.
Right.
And now he's spending billions of dollars in the Middle East for a war that a lot of people do not approve of. So I think that that even if the war in Iran doesn't itself is not a potent issue for the midterms, I think that the repercussions of his foreign policy will be.
Well, if I'm a betting man, I think that the war in Iran is absolutely going to be a massive factor in the midterms. But when we look at foreign policy and we look at some of this polling here, let's remember what the foreign policy has been so far. It has obviously been a supposed ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, but we know that Israel has been launching offensive campaigns in Gaza. Despite that, we know that the war in Ukraine is still going on. Trump has not done a deal there, like he said. We have the possible annexation of Greenland, which he has threatened, much to the dismay of our allies in NATO. We had the capturing of the former, I guess we're calling him former president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, because he's now in a U.S. prison awaiting trial. So when Gen Z has been polled about this, this is not popular either. Shocker. There's been a 20-point drop in approval for young Americans on this issue, and only 39% of Americans under 30 believe that it is important for the U.S. to take an active role in foreign policy. Now, that's interesting to me, and I think that speaks to this overwhelming sentiment of, the MAGA contingent and a lot of these young Republicans who have flocked to the MAGA movement about America first and the idea of withdrawing from the world and using that money not on the world but on us.
I think what I feel as someone who is just over the age of 30 and has a slightly different opinion is that I feel like the problem is that things have become so bad domestically, whether that be healthcare, whether that be affordability, whether that be our education system, what have you, that young people have begun to feel that strangle so tightly that they, and not just young people, but people in general, have begun to feel that so tightly that they then look and say, okay, well, what are we spending money on if we're not spending it on healthcare, or if we're not spending it on education, or where are taxpayer dollars going if we're not spending it on making housing more affordable, or what have you? Oh, we're spending it on military assistance to other countries. Oh, we're spending it on US aid. Oh, we're spending it on these things that are, so I don't think, I'm curious, I should say that I don't think the problem is that we have money spent overseas to impart foreign influence and help people around the world. I think the problem is that we've fucked up everything in our own country and the systems that we have here so badly that everyone is just desperate to figure out where we can refocus that attention. And the obvious thing, because we're all inherently narcissistic, is like, wait, why does everybody else get something that we don't get?
Right. Well, I'll say I think you're so right. And what I would add to that is that I think never before in at least our lifetime have we felt like there was such an obvious, we're taking from pile A to give to pile B. And what I mean by that is like what we saw Jake Auchincloss or Richie Torres tweet out about, hey, the government, like the administration wants to cut your healthcare funding so that they can pay for the $200 billion they're asking for this war that none of you are asking for, right? So it's like, I feel like when I look back to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I don't remember there being such like clear cut, like, hey, we're taking from your healthcare to fund this. Like, it was much more obscured. And I feel like maybe that's the age we're in with social media, and there's a lot more transparency in terms of like what's being disseminated.
I also think the difference, though, is that a lot of people, I guess not towards the end, but like at least at the beginning of the wars in the Middle East, when we were, middle school, high school, whatever, that there was.
Some of us were in high school.
Sorry, I was very young.
Even college. Some of us were even in college. You could say
that there was support because we had literally been attacked in the worst terrorist attack on our country. And so I think that there was a beginning of, oh yeah, like we do need to be spending money on this. This is where we want our taxpayer dollars going because we don't feel safe. Now what is happening is we're saying, okay, we don't feel safe. We don't feel educated. We don't feel healthy. We don't feel like we can afford things. Like we don't feel all of these things. These are actually the more important things. Like back then it was like, we don't feel safe. The money should be spent. We should go figure this out. Over the years, I think that changed. And I think you're right. There maybe wasn't that like one-to-one messaging. I also don't think people were talking as much about the national debt back then as they were now, even though the debt was exploding. And I think now people see that like, we don't just have endless money to spend on everything. And so I think that just like culturally it's different, but I also think that the minutia of how people were thinking about foreign policy was really, really different back then.
And I think too, when you talk to Republicans, they'll tell you that, well, actually the Affordable Care Act was a big driver in the increase of premium costs. But at the same time, I think you now are seeing so many people who have access to healthcare that never did before and now have come to rely on that.
Yeah.
And, so when like this individual who was talking about $100,000 worth of student loan debt, it's like, okay, so you're paying that off. And then now you're feeling like I can't afford, how do I pay for rent and how do I pay for gas and how do I pay for healthcare premiums? And all of a sudden, these are now real tangible issues that you can add up in your life as far as putting hard costs on. And you're like, so I'm going to give up those things so that you can afford another bomb to go drop over wherever. It's like, hell no. So I get it. And lastly, of course, I think maybe the most polarizing issue in our country right now, immigration.
Yeah. So you say polarizing, but interestingly, in this study, 60% of respondents to the poll who are under 30 felt that the Trump administration was doing too much to deport undocumented immigrants in the United States. And this issue was specifically amongst young men, as 60% of the male respondents cited immigration as a top issue, and specifically Trump's expansion of immigration raids to target anyone who looks or sounds foreign. So I think that it's very notable here that although this is a very polarizing issue with, I will admit, a lot of nuance to how to deal with it, I think that what you are seeing is that the Trump administration, by and large, amongst most voters, and specifically in this episode, as we're talking about young voters under 30, that 60% is a pretty solid majority that does definitely include some conservative and Republicans in there, saying that like, this isn't what we wanted. We didn't want these kinds of raids. And I think that the Trump administration has already started to course correct. I mean, Kristi Noem is gone. You saw that they pulled out of Minneapolis when things got too heated there. But lo and behold, that does not mean that their sort of operation has ended. It has just become a little bit quieter because they saw that the public was not thrilled about it. And then you started to have some Republican politicians push back on it a little bit as well. And so I think with the issue of immigration, I feel like what we're seeing now is Republicans are trying to message around this lack of ICE funding in this new DHS shutdown business as like the Democrats being against safety and law enforcement and all of this stuff. And I think the Democrats are going to have to hold their line and make people understand why they are not voting to further fund ICE, which already, by the way, has a lot of funding. And so I think this is kind of going to be a battle between who can sort of hold out faster and who can get the public on their side more effectively.
When you listen to Democrats and Republicans talk about border security, they overwhelmingly agree that, maybe more Republicans than Democrats, overwhelmingly agree that Trump really curtailed the border security issue that was a prevailing issue, but has absolutely gone too far. And really, the anecdotal evidence that I would point to, that I think is not so anecdotal, but actually empirical, are a lot of our farmers, particularly in Iowa, who have said, with tariffs and immigration crackdowns, they are getting decimated. They're losing their businesses. They rely on immigration workforces. And I think everybody thought, okay, yes, let's kick out the violent criminals. But wait a minute, why are we kicking out these hardworking
Hmm.
farmers and these waitresses and cleaning ladies and nannies? And that has become a bridge too far. And I guess the question is, how are Republicans and Democrats alike going to message on this? Are Republicans going to say, hey, we hear you, and actually we now want to be a check and balance on this administration in a way we weren't the first 2 years, right? And they're going to have to explain that. And are they going to say, hey, no, actually, we really do want to tap the brakes on this? Or are Democrats going to be able to say, you know what? You don't trust these guys. Listen, they haven't done shit the last 2 years. Follow us. I think
Yeah.
that's the debate.
I mean, I think you'll see some moderates. Like, I think Mike Lawler has spoken
Mm,
before about, really doubling down on this. Like, we should be doing only violent criminals. I think early
right.
on, there was the talk of, oh, they're all criminals because they came here illegally, even though that
Right,
technically
right.
wasn't
And
true.
people know
But
that's
like,
not the
but I think that
case.
now you'll see some of that. But I actually think that for the most part, we're not going to see any of that check and balance from the Republican side, because I think
Mm,
that there is a growing now sentiment between Republicans and Democrats that is really this battle over ICE. And
mm.
so one of the politicians that we cover is Gabe Evans, who's a freshman Republican from Colorado. And so the district that he won in 2022 was labeled, sorry, 2024 was labeled the most purple district in the entire country. And he beat
Wow.
out another first term uh, lawmaker who was a Democrat named Yadira Caraveo, who had flipped the seat before that. So he's from
Yep.
this very purple district in Colorado. He's a former police officer, so he talks a lot about law enforcement.
Mm.
And he put together this like compilation video of a bunch of Democrats saying that they want to get rid of ICE and that ICE can't be trusted and that we can't fund ICE in this new way. And his comment on it was, Democrats want to defund law enforcement, but don't take my word for it, hear directly from them. It's tough to negotiate a DHS funding agreement when radical Democrats want to dismantle and abolish the agencies within it.
Hmm.
So I thought this was interesting because I have 2 points of view on it. One is, I think it's very frustrating when any politician tries to make a generalized statement out of something very specific. And the idea of getting more funding for ICE at this point does not mean that all Democrats want to abolish ICE. I think there are Democrats, I would say the majority of Democrats actually right
Mm-hmm.
now, who are saying we cannot give more money to ICE unless X, Y, and Z happens. Because that's not happening, we're not going to fund it. But then there are a lot of Democrats out there who are saying, we want to abolish ICE. It's becoming a huge campaign slogan. If you saw signs from the No Kings protest last weekend,
Right.
you will have seen a bunch of signs that said abolish ICE. And what is interesting in this Time article we've been talking about today, 19% of Republicans, so very low, but
Mm-hmm.
48% of American adults across the political spectrum support abolishing ICE. So that's not the majority of
Wow.
Americans. And I think that what Democrats need to pay attention to is, how do they stay very focused on this message that what ICE is doing right now in this capacity is dangerous. And most Americans agree with that, as we just stated about immigration, but also understanding that these large statements about overhauling are maybe not as popular as some of them thought, specifically in
Right.
general elections. I think in
Well, it makes me go
primaries,
back to defund the police, and that was not a winning slogan.
right. So, but in
Yeah.
the moment it was, right? So it's like, it's this, I think it's a constant thing of like, it can galvanize people in a
well,
certain
in the
way,
moment
but
of
then
a
it can-
Democratic primary, right?
Yes,
but
but then
not
it
in the
can come
moment
back-
for voters.
then it can come back
Really?
to bite you.
Right.
So I was frustrated by this thing from Gabe Evans because I wanted to say, okay, they don't want to defund all law enforcement. First of all, they don't want to get rid of all law enforcement. And so you're conflating ICE with all law enforcement. And they're actually, for the most part, not even saying they want to get rid of ICE. They're just saying we don't want to fund it unless it there's some rules changes that we feel are more safe. But then at the same token, I think Democrats have to be careful with how forceful they are about the idea of abolishing ICE, because that could come back to haunt them for exactly what you're saying, which is that there has been advancement on border security and there was general support for making sure we can go after violent criminals, and the people who will be doing that are ICE. So it's a very thin tightrope. But I think, again, the moral of the story is that, like, young people aren't dumb. They see the nuances in situations. They see what issues matter to them. And it's the same issues that matter to most of us. We want to feel safe. We want to feel fed. We want to feel healthy. And we want to feel like we can prosper in our lives. And I think that, unfortunately for Trump and the Republicans right now, people do not feel that. And you can't keep blaming Biden because it's been a lot of years now.
Can I leave you with a quote from a young Republican named Jack Greenberg, who was 23 years old, who attended this recent CPAC conference? Because I think this sums up everything that you're saying. He's quoted as saying, "I just want politics to be boring again." And I think that is the feeling of a lot of people right now.
Yeah.
So,
well,
until then, see you next week.
We'll have a drink. And on this Thursday, we're continuing our series Primary Watch, where we're interviewing young people running in competitive primary races around the country. We are going to be talking to a young man who is trying to take over the seat of 80-something-year-old Steny Hoyer, who announced that he was retiring. It's a very crowded field, but our
Nancy
guest of ours,
Pelosi's number 2. We can call him number 2, like from Austin Powers.
Perfect.
He really is number 2.
I love it. Anyway, this guest of ours, Harry Jaron, he's running in that primary, and he also just had a new baby, so we're going to talk about that.
Very excited to talk to him. That'll be a good episode.